Hey, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Live More Life podcast, the good news about your health. This is a podcast where we're going to dive deep into the world of healthcare, longevity, health and wellness, and everything in between to help bring you the most up to date insights and recent breakthroughs in improving your personal health. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Erik Reis. I'm the Director of Health and Wellness at Nobody Studios. I'm also fortunate enough to say that I am one of the co-founders of Nobody Studios as well, too. For those of you who don't know what Nobody Studios is a high-velocity venture studio focused on building 100 companies in the next 5 years. Don't ask us what our 10-year, 20-year goals are because they're going to be even more audacious than that. We are focused on building not only amazing startups, but startups that are going to change people's lives. Why I'm so passionate about the health and wellness and healthcare space is that not only have I been a doctor first and a patient, and now an advisor, and more importantly, an entrepreneur, what we're excited about doing is we're excited to bring you not only a cutting edge technology, but the brightest minds, the most intelligent individuals who are in this field, who we have fortunate connections with. On this very first episode, we're going to explore topics ranging from nutrition, neuroscience, all the interesting things going on in healthcare and health and wellness. And on every one of these episodes and on this podcast, we're going to explore things like diet, nutrition, neuroscience, brain health, recent medical breakthroughs, emerging trends, you name it, we're probably going to touch on it. With all of this designed to help empower you with the knowledge and motivation to live more life. This podcast is designed to challenge your thinking, give you a real-world doctorate in medicine, and more importantly, to help you understand to live your life and live more life to the fullest. So if you're ready to get going with this change, then we are going to get started. In today's episode, we're going to be talking with the brilliant individual, Dr. Ben Rein, a renowned researcher, influencer, and highly esteemed expert in the neuroscience space, who's been pretty busy with his 1+ million followers, educating the world about science, medicine, the brain, and literally everything in between related to health. Ben is not your average PhD researcher, and he's built his reputation on educating the masses about complex topics like neuroscience and physiology of the human brain and human body. Ben has become a close colleague, a friend, a mentor, someone I deeply respect. And I'm absolutely excited to have Ben with us on the show today for this first episode. So, Ben, thank you for joining us on the Live More Life podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm touched truly by that extremely kind intro. And it's my honor to be here for the very first episode of all time. How exciting is that? The
It is
pilot.
exciting. Yeah, we're grateful to have you. And I know that there's so much more that you have to say about your background and your career and where you started and where you came from. So for the viewers who may not know you as well as I do, why don't you go ahead and fill us in a little bit about your background and what brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a neuroscientist by training. I mean, you covered a lot, but I'll give the kind of, high level view. Um, Neuroscientist by training, I've always been interested in social behavior and why certain people are outgoing, other people are quiet. We have these natural variabilities across society. You look around a restaurant, you'll see it. Certain tables are quiet, other tables are loud. This is just something we accept as a part of humanity, but I see that as a very interesting variability in brain function. And I was always interested in studying that. So I did my PhD in the neuroscience, the neurobiology of autism and how genetic risk factors alter certain brain functions that underlie things like social cognition. And while I was in my PhD, by pure happenstance, I posted a video on TikTok, and it was a fateful occurrence that I was swept up by the algorithm overlords, and it went viral. And that was a really pivotal moment, obviously, in my life because I realized that one, there was a huge gap between what I understood about science and what the people in the comments seemed to understand about science. I recognized that, whoa, maybe there's kind of an importance in educating and being clear about science. And the other thing was that I realized there's a lot of impact in education, and it's not just all about obviously progressing science, advancing our understanding of the brain it was at that time my chief priority.
Sure.
But then I realized, well, it's also important to get this information out, and I never had thought about social media as an outlet for doing that. So I kind of started doing them both at the same time. Went to a postdoc at Stanford University, continued my research on the brain and on social behavior. At that point, I began studying the neurobiology of empathy and studying how the drug MDMA enhances empathy in the brain. That study was published a couple of months ago. We now have a better understanding of what's going on there and the mechanism of what MDMA is doing to act as an empathogen. And meanwhile, of course, I continue posting on social media. And so, all the while kind of keeping these two plates spinning. And then recently decided to actually step away from my research responsibilities and pursue the science communication work full time, which kind of manifests itself as a variety of roles, including, of course, making videos. I'm working on a book, Chief Science Officer of the Mind Science Foundation, which funds early career neuroscientists who practice science communication, and a couple other things. And so that's the short of it, I suppose.
Well, you are a busy man there, sir. And so with that being said, I know there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about. I know that there are a lot of people that are excited about this too. And so once again, thank you for joining us. I'm curious. I mean, it's always serendipitous when people go down a path or a journey and they find something that they're really excited or passionate about. Like, what brought you into the neuroscience space and going down the path that you did to pursue studying the brain, this elusive, enigmatic kind of system that so many people put on a pedestal? It seems like it's something you're always chasing. And so for you, like, what attracted you to neurology and neuroscience?
So the initial attraction was what I described earlier. I mean, I was sitting in my, middle school cafeteria and looking around and being like, whoa, how interesting is it that we have like the popular kids and like the quiet kids, and those kids are sitting reading, and these
Sure.
people are like laughing boisterously. And I was truly interested in that and the sort of manifestation of social behavior. But the kind of lesser known thing is that I wasn't really sold on neuroscience, mostly because I wasn't sure that I could do it. I was actually uncertain of my ability to wrap my head around, like, molecular biology and genetics and all these complex topics that you have to understand
Yeah.
to study neuroscience. And so I was actually studying psychology in my undergrad, and I had a nightmare that really was kind of like the force that pushed me over the edge. And in the nightmare, I had this sort of demon force that was following me around, and it would make me do certain things, and whatever, if I didn't do what it told me to do, I started to shape shift, and I like lost my sense of self. And it was really terrifying and uncomfortable. And of course, the dream culminates with the demon force calling me into the basement, and the lights go out and it's raining. It was very cliche, but at the moment it was terrifying. And and I felt this impression that this force was about to confront me, and that I was about to meet this demon for the first time, and like this overwhelming power just like faced me, and I woke up full of adrenaline, of course. And I, without thinking about the content of the dream, I laid in bed for hours thinking about the fact that my brain just did this, that I was immersed in this fully, vivid experience with all, multi-sensory inputs and a storyline, and there were characters. I had like a partner and dogs and stuff. And I was like grown up, and then it was just so complex. And I was like, how is it possible that my brain can generate like basically a like motion picture movie that I'm in, and I'm engaging with it, and I have no idea that it's all happening in my brain. It's completely distinct, my conscious experience in the dream and the dream itself. And I just sat there for hours thinking about how amazing the brain was, and that I could no longer neglect my interest in it. And so that day I changed my major. Basically, I decided to study neuroscience. And over thinking about it later, I realized that I think the force in my dream that was making me do things I didn't want to do was my career, and that I was basically in the wrong career, and it was like making me not myself and telling me to do things I didn't want to do. And so it really came full circle. Every time I talk about it, I have like the chills right now. It was really a powerful experience in my life.
It's one of those examples of something that I think so many people take for granted, is the fact that we get to feel emotions and empathy and pain, for better or for worse, and these things we attribute to humanity that, when you look back in the grand scheme of things, we are fortunate to be able to have that. And what a life-changing path and event to have. So that's very intuitive of you to take that journey. And I want to touch back on something that you had mentioned earlier, is just about your focus on education. And you've already been getting a couple shout outs here. So Mark McNally gave you a shout out. Rob Vocal already gave you a shout out. And so you've already got a fan club joining you here there, Ben. So congrats on that. Something you had mentioned earlier too in the early studies of what you were looking into with your research with children with autism. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what surprised you in that space, because this is something that a lot of people are looking into about the prevalence of autism, the increasing rates of it. I think we still don't really fully understand or fully know about it, but like, I'm intrigued to hear kind of what your thought process was and what surprised you about the research that you did in that space.
Yeah. So what I was doing was looking at genetic risk factors. So, sorry, my dog over here. You can see a little tail
No,
shaking
good.
around. She's
Great,
over
great,
here having,
great timing.
yeah, giving herself a little bath. Um, so autism is a really, really complex condition. It's autism spectrum disorder for a reason. It's a spectrum. It's, what other condition do we have where we recognize it as a spectrum that it manifests in many different ways? And my belief is that this spectrum reflects a variety of brain changes, that there are so many different sort of paths to an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. It's estimated that something like 60%, give or take, of autism cases are driven by genetic factors, and then there are
Interesting.
other things, environmental factors. I will note, not vaccinations. That was a
Good call.
retracted study from 1998. There are many studies now showing that there's no link there. But anyway, so I was trying to figure out in my work, um, there are various genetic risk factors for autism, which, by the way, there's like hundreds.
Yeah.
It's not like there's like one gene that if you have a mutation in that gene, you're more likely to be diagnosed with autism. It's like 100 genes. So again, and they all affect different pathways in the brain, which to me, I think, to answer your question, I suppose, like, what surprised me the most was that fact right there, that you could have a mutation in one of any of these 100 genes or
Hmm.
more genes, and they all touch on different pathways in the brain. Maybe it's protein synthesis, maybe it's synaptic transmission between cells, maybe it's dendrite outgrowth, whatever. It could be all these different processes. And somehow, even though they affect different things, they all somehow converge on a change in social behavior. And
Wow.
what that tells me is that social behavior is not some simple, one-off process in the brain. It's a accumulation of all these different signaling cascades, of course, involving multiple brain areas, which we do know about social behavior and autism as well.
Yeah.
That, if you have like a sort of a break in one of these chain links anywhere in this chain, that it can disrupt the function of the entire system, and the system is social behavior. So what I was studying is, in animal models, if we have the mutations that are associated with autism in humans, if like a mouse, for example, has that mutation, first we test their social behavior. Oftentimes we find that the same mutations that are associated with autism in humans change the social behaviors of the mice. And then what we were doing was looking deeply into the brains of these mice and trying to figure out, what systems are these genetic mutations preferentially affecting. And we were looking at the prefrontal cortex specifically, finding a bunch of changes in synaptic transmission. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in like social cognition, higher level, like social thinking, trying to decide what's appropriate to do. And this is just one of the brain areas that's involved in
Fair.
autism.
So at one point in your career, what you're saying, some of your closest colleagues were mammals and rats and mice. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, I spent a lot of time with those boys.
The sides of research that very few people really understand, right? So you've clearly come a long way in your career from starting off to that to now, having this awesome educational platform. And I know that you've done some really cool work with Andrew Huberman, which I'm a massive fan of. I'm a huge fan of what he's doing. And just on top of that, just educating people about that. I see you as a really up and coming rising star.
Thank you.
For those who haven't followed Ben or aren't following Ben, you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on nearly most social media platforms. Ben, you posted something recently that I thought was really interesting. And for those who are fellow neuroscience nerds out there, I think this is something that a lot of people really find intriguing, is the placebo effect and empathy. And so, Ben, I want to ask you to please just kind of talk about this recent video. I think it was a journal article from like 2015 that talked about the placebo effect and the perceptions of pain and a little bit of empathy mixed into that. Can you give us just a little bit of backstory and kind of the results of that study? So I thought it was really enlightening and really challenges the way we all think about how we feel about things in our life.
Yeah, of course. So, it's a series of studies really on the research in the field of empathy for pain. And when I first learned of these studies, I was like, I can't believe this is real research. It seems like
Yeah.
something like the storyline of like a sci-fi movie or something. Um, I'm going to give a few points and try to connect them all in sequence. So, okay, the first thing is, if you see someone experiencing pain, you can obviously say, oh, I guess that they're if I had to rate their pain on a level of 1 to 10, you could do that, right? That's partially empathy because you can understand what they're going through. Now, what's really interesting is if you give, I'm going to use you, Dr. Erik, as the example. So let's say you are watching me suffer something painful. I'm getting my hand poked with a needle, let's say. So if I gave you acetaminophen, a painkiller, before you watched me suffer that stabbing, you would report my pain as less painful, which you would rate that on lower on a scale of 1 to 10, which suggests that painkillers also reduce empathy for pain, not just pain
Interesting.
itself. So now what's super interesting is that placebo painkillers are really effective. That if I, before I got stabbed in the hand, was given a pill, a sugar pill, and someone told me, hey, this is a really effective painkiller. We're testing it in the study, whatever, you're one of the subjects. Even though I didn't actually receive any painkillers, I would report that experience as less painful. So the placebo painkillers are very effective. Now, the same effect is seen on the observer stance, that if you were given a placebo painkiller or placebo and told it was a painkiller, you would similarly report my pain as less painful. So now we have like multiple levels of experience and observation of experience, both of which are not only diminished by painkillers themselves, but also by placebo painkillers, suggesting that the body has some sort of natural mechanism that when you're told you've taken a painkiller, it somehow relieves your own pain and relieves empathy for pain. And so the final step of these studies that's mind-blowing is that when the observer, so you in this case, was given an opioid receptor antagonist, so it blocks opioid receptors in your body, which all that really means is that it's blocking your body's natural ability to send opioid signals between cells. And as many people know, like opioids like morphine are associated with pain relief. So when we block that natural system in your body and then give you a placebo painkiller, basically the placebo painkiller doesn't work anymore. It blocks the effect, which suggests, and sorry, this is so many threads to connect, but which suggests that placebo painkillers, when you're given a fake painkiller, activates the body's natural pain relief systems. And that is how it's driving that actual pain relief and relief from observational pain as well. It's a just like mind-blowing sci-fi result that to me shows obviously the importance of placebos and the legitimacy of placebos. And this is why so many times in studies of all different kinds, when you're studying the efficacy of SSRIs, for example, for depression, the SSRI group, you'll see a 33% remission rate from depression, and the placebo group will see like a 25% remission rate from depression, because for some reason expectation has a profound influence on outcomes and in experience. And that study tells us that it's not just some sort of psychological factor. There's actually physiological neurochemical processes in the body and brain that support those outcomes.
I mean, studies like that make you challenge everything you think you know and everything you don't even think you even understand, right? I mean, it is amazing to think about how impactful just even that lesson is right there about simply stating the fact that your brain essentially produces this pharmacy of neurotransmitters, cocktails, and molecules that we've tried to mimic with medications, pills, supplements, whatever, but you have everything already inside of you. It's just whether or not you can instigate that. So firmly challenges a lot of beliefs and notions. Ben, I'm curious, and honestly, I'm probably more curious than anyone else about where do you think the future of like neuroscience and technology will take us? I mean, people are talking about computer brain computer interfaces. You've got Elon with Neuralink. You've got a lot of emerging trends with neuromodulation. Like, what are a couple of things that you're kind of like researching now or kind of getting into these days that are like intriguing to you, or they're not necessarily utopian, but you're like, God, if this happened, this could be interesting for us as a species. Like, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I think there's two answers. I have two answers to this question. The first is more specific treatment approaches. So I just mentioned SSRIs. So SSRIs, they upregulate serotonin signaling, they increase serotonin signaling, which is, as we know, associated with relief from depression symptoms in many patients. So, but the thing is, when you increase serotonin throughout the brain and body, serotonin is a very important neurotransmitter. It's not just involved in mood regulation, it's also involved in other things like appetite and all these other things. So when you have the mood improvement in some patients, but then you also have all these off-target effects. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just figure out, okay, where is that serotonin acting? Let's say in a specific brain area, it's increasing the activity of this one brain region. Okay, we can take the chemicals completely out of it and just use some sort of transcranial like magnetic stimulation
Yeah.
to stimulate that part of the brain that's receiving the serotonin, forget about all those off-target side effects, and just drive the actual physiological change that's important for depression, instead of trying to like indirectly drive it through a pharmacological action. So I'm really excited about that. That's what I mean by the specificity of treatments, gaining more resolution and getting more accurate over time. And, I think it's been a long time since we've had really any substantial or groundbreaking developments in like brain imaging. Like if you need a brain scan, you still go to a big, massive MRI. Everyone steps out of the room, there are now like new brain scanners that are portable, things like that. And on the other hand, also, not just imaging the brain, but stimulating the brain, like, direct currents, transcranial direct current stimulation, those types of things. But that brings me to the other answer, which is invasive technologies, which are, like you mentioned, like Neuralink, implanted brain electrodes. So as a neuroscientist, I am of the opinion that there are very few people in the world who actually should have brain implants, and those are the people who need it because they have some sort of brain condition that is only effectively treated through the use of intracranial stimulation. But the thing that's exciting about that field is that basically the advancement of AI has allowed us to get a lot more information from these signals implanted in the brain and also from outside of the brain. So, for example, let's use an intracranial electrode as an example. Let's say you have epilepsy, and so you have an electrode implanted in your brain, which is often used as a treatment. And this electrode can sense signals as well as stimulate the brain. So if you're recording from this, if a researcher is recording from this electrode, you get this massive data set on a screen of electrical activity that looks like this, and you're like, okay, the human brain can't look at that and be like, oh, yes, they are thinking about eating toast with butter. Like, that's not how we can't do that. But an AI like algorithm, these basically AI tools that can interpret massive data sets can detect patterns that the human brain can't. And so I should say the human mind can't, to distinguish from the human brain research I'm talking about. And so it allows us to use these signals more effectively, where you can look at the screen and the AI can say they're thinking about toast only because it'll notice last time when they thought about toast, this pattern, the same pattern of activity arised. And I specify that because I don't want people to think that we can just hold up a magnet to someone's head and be like, they're thinking about toast. It's an iterative process.
Yeah.
That the whole mind reading thing is really, mind reading is not possible unless you train a device to read your mind. So
fair.
Anyways, no one's doing that.
They're doing some of that retracing with memories and sleep, are they not? So like they have you, wear like an EEG or some sort of sensor for the brain where you're doing an activity during the day or a specific activity. And then they look at your dreams and you see it like 2 or 3 times faster as a recording rate where they'll see those spikes, which is really intriguing and interesting.
Yeah, I think they're called hippocampal sharp wave ripples, I believe.
Yeah, fair.
It's thought to be a memory consolidation mechanism, I believe, that essentially if you're experiencing something, and speaking to the audience now, but if you're experiencing something throughout the day and that experience is associated with a pattern of brain activity, research shows in animals mostly, I think, I'm not aware of any human studies, that the same pattern of brain activity will play, I believe it plays in forward motion at like really high speed, and then it plays backwards. And it's thought to be like a memory consolidation, that your brain is sort of like replaying the experience. And when researchers disrupt that process of the replay, which is really difficult to do because you don't know when it's going to happen, but if they kind of like scramble the brain activity during sleep, then it prevents memory consolidation to an extent in animals. So it's like your brain is kind of like running back through the day's events during sleep by like replaying the activity and then going backwards. Yeah, really interesting stuff. And as you know from my nightmare experience that led me into neuroscience, I am really interested in the neuroscience of dreaming, and that's a field that we have a lot to figure out.
Yeah, well, we are too as a studio. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things that really resonate for us from the health and wellness and the health side of space is, we're really focused on personalized medicine. longevity is something that is really intriguing to us. And I think you're aware, but we've been doing some work with Gina Poe at UCLA, who's a sleep neuroscientist, and talking about and trying to figure out ways to help people optimize their sleep. And gosh, dreams are something that are really intriguing to us too. And we, we started today's discussion with a nightmare, and we ended it with a lucid dream at this point. And so really intriguing, kind of full circle on that. And as you've alluded to, there's so much to be said and learned about the brain. So Ben, for those who are listening who may not have the experience in neuroscience like you do, I'm curious, like, what is like one piece of advice you'd give people regarding like their brain health? What are some tips or things that people should be doing today to take care of their brain, maintain brain integrity?
So I'll keep it on the discussion theme. I have a couple of these, but you cannot underestimate the value of good quality sleep and sufficient sleep. Um, so I have narcolepsy, a sleep disorder where if anyone knows of narcolepsy, it's probably because of the videos of like the wiener dog that runs around and falls down and falls asleep.
I don't know if I've seen those.
Okay, not you, everyone but you. There's these YouTube videos where like, you've seen like the lambs or the goats or whatever, they like make a noise and then they just stiffen and
Yeah,
fall over.
they get too, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of like cataplexy, which is, so narcolepsy is a condition where you fall asleep randomly and quickly. Luckily, I don't have that element of it, but what I do have is just chronic fatigue, where I'm super tired, and if I go into a sleep study, it shows that basically I can go directly from being awake to being in REM sleep in like 6 minutes, where normally
Hmm.
it takes people like 60 to 90 minutes. So I basically exist on the brink of being asleep and dreaming, and which because of that, I need to have a really really regimented sleep habits. And so I every single night, like I go to bed at the exact same time. Well, not the exact same time. There's a margin, but roughly the
Sure.
same time. Um, my days of going out late to the bars and compromising my sleep are over. But I obviously sleep in a dark room. I try to keep the room as silent as possible. If I wake up in the morning and the sun's out and I want to keep sleeping, I put an eye mask on. If I'm sleeping in a noisy environment, I use white noise. I try to stop eating a couple hours before bed. I try to exercise during the day to promote deep sleep. All of these things are things that you can do to promote
Yeah.
quality sleep. And it blows my mind when I meet people and they're like, "Oh yeah, I get like 5.5 hours of sleep," and I'm like, "You have no idea." It's like you could be living in like the movie Invincible, where you don't even know what it's like if you get 8 hours.
Yeah.
Like you got to try this. And so I always, it's not just about the subjective experience of being alive the next day that's better, but of course sleep is also good for mood. Higher quality sleep is associated with lower risk of dementia and other
Mhm.
diseases and longevity. You really prioritizing sleep is just so incredibly important. And I just, it really blows my mind when people can operate without like 8 or 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah, well, there's a reason you're supposed to sleep a third of your life away. And I'm right there with you. I think prioritizing sleep is one of the most effective ways to do that. Now, there are obviously clinical conditions and problems that people can have. I mean, I think 1 in 3 people have some sort of insomnia or sleep apnea. And so those are real things. But you're right. I think sleep hygiene is huge. So you've really touched on some solid components there, and I mean, it's so easy to go deeper with you, and I know we could take all the time in the world, and I respect your time so much. So, two things I want to just kind of end with for those of you who are on this. Thank you for joining us today on our first episode, Ben. I'm absolutely grateful to have you on. Ton of respect for you, and I love what you're doing. So, massive fan. For those of you who
Thank you
want
so
more
much.
information, who want to learn more about this, who are curious about finding ways to help you help yourself, we have a newsletter. And if you want to, please go register. And it's on the link below. Register at nobodystudios.com/newsletter. Throw your name in, throw your email in. We are actively building out a newsletter for the Live More Life campaign that we're building out right now. And it's going to be full of amazing tips, tricks, educational content, like things. I promise I'm probably going to have to give Ben multiple shout outs on his social media for this. Yeah, Ben, I know that you're also working in the background on something quite exciting. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this book that you'll be launching in the next, let's say, year or so? I know there's maybe a different timeline than that, but give people a little bit of a sneak peek about what you're working on in the background, because I know you've got some exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, of course. It's very early. Like you said, we're probably a year out. But when you asked me about an important tip for longevity, I thought very deeply before I gave the answer of sleep, because I was very inclined to give the other answer of social interaction. And that's really the topic of the book is the value and neuroscience of social interaction, which, you know, it's nice that my journey in neuroscience began with a curiosity about social interaction. I spent a decade doing studies and reading studies and learning, and now here I am writing a book about it. And so, I think it's incredibly relevant and important in modern life. We don't interact with people as much as we used to. I mean, this is great, but frankly, we are also virtual right now. In the past, 20 years ago, we would have been in person. I would have probably flown over to wherever you are and hung out in person. And it's just we're living in a different world. And I think although our objective social lives, the amount of time that we spend socializing is changing, the brain's demand for social interaction is not changing. It's almost like if you imagine that we were suddenly living in a world where everybody just got 3 hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep, and we kind of would just get used to it, right? And everybody would feel worse, but you wouldn't really think about it, but it's like, oh yeah, wait a minute, I did kind of feel better when I got 8 hours of sleep. And all the research points to 7 or 8 hours of sleep being healthier for you than 3. And that's kind of where we're at with interaction, is that we've all kind of dialed it back, but that's not necessarily the right thing for the brain. And so the book is going to go into detail about what does interaction do for the brain. And I can't wait to share it. I'm just chomping at the bit here with it.
Can't wait to read it. You've got a list of people who are going to pre-order that book already on this podcast episode. So I promised you that. So please keep us posted. Thank you once again for joining us. And for those of you who are on this episode, if you want to learn more about the podcast and what we're doing, please join us. Please sign up for the newsletter. Go follow Ben on all of his links, all of his content, all of his social media stuff. Like, Ben is just doing some amazing work. And I continue to learn a ton from you as well too, Ben. So thank you for joining us. And for everybody else who's on here, that's it for the Live More Life podcast. Stay healthy, stay positive, and stay hungry for education. So we'll see everybody soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.